Hi everyone, I'm Vincent Hall. Today's drawing class is going to incorporate several of the techniques we've used in the last two episodes, pencil and ballpoint pen, but we're going to add the addition of some color. And from this point on, some of the drawing lessons are going to be using different medium that will give us color, such as color pencils, pastels, watercolor pencils, and if you don't have anything like that, maybe you have some markers laying around the house, a highlighter even, something. So I'll be showing you how all of that can work. And I thought today, keeping with the whole theme that the photography class is doing, which is rebirth, that I would show you how to draw a simple tree. Actually, two different trees. We're going to be doing a deciduous and an evergreen. Pretty easy stuff, but you might want to follow along, and I'll see you on the paper side. Alrighty. Here we have two simple drawings of trees, a deciduous one, and we have the evergreen tree. And we're going to look at both of these, not as trees, but just as kinds of lines and marks. So first we're just going to practice a little bit of what we've done, a bit of a review from the last lesson. This deciduous tree right here is simply going to be a practice of doing light lines to dark lines to light lines, and even tone lines. If you can do these three lines, you've got a deciduous tree down pat. To do an evergreen tree, of course we can do lines for the trunk, but this is more of a shading technique. If you've ever been able to write the letter M or W, you've got a deciduous tree down, because it's really, think about up, down, like we might do for a W, but just closer together. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And then think of pressing lighter as you get to one side or another, and just do a couple of these practice strokes, and you should be able to get something that'll start to look like what a tree could be once we put it all together. This is not the tree. These are just practice things that we're doing just to get warmed up. Warming up is really important in drawing. It gets your hand moving, it gets your brain thinking in right brain mode, which is your creative thought. And it gives you a chance to start to feel the medium that you're using and feel comfortable with that. Okay, with that said, let's move on. I'm going to start, I'll switch to the other side of the paper to save resources, to the other side of this paper, and I'm going to just do this little, I'm going to actually go this way. I'll go landscape or horizontal. I'm going to just do this little deciduous tree here. I like to start at the bottom because that's where it's going to tell me where my trunk is, and then going up from there should be pretty easy. And we're going to start on the other side and just pretty much draw what's called a contour outline. So I'm not drawing the insides yet of the basic part of the tree. So I just have this Y where the tree splits into two. Once we get this Y part done, we can start to branch off, pun intended, into some of the other parts of the tree and just start drawing here. And remember, with branches, the further away they get from the trunk, the thinner they are. So we'll just keep going here, getting some thinner ones, and I will be modifying this just a little bit so that we can get some movement going on this video, and you won't be sitting here all day watching me talk about drawing a tree. But I will get a few branches in here. They can be craggy, they can be whatever you want. And then the key down here is, remember, there's usually a root system that's just as big as the top of the tree, so we don't have to show all of that, but it's always nice to just kind of taper some lines so the tree doesn't look all by itself. Now, the fun part with a pencil, if you're drawing a tree, is you can do a couple of things. We can draw some lines in here to simulate bark, and that's personally what I like to do, or you can just simply shade it in. Since I'm going to be adding some color to this with some basic color materials, I'm going to not color all of this in completely, but rather just to show you some basic ideas on what we can do here with these branches. And they don't have to be hard, they're just lines. So don't get too worried about any of these things. I'll just put another branch here, kind of coming out. All right. Moving on to the evergreen tree, this one is pretty straightforward. Just one line right down lightly is going to give us, I hope you can see that here on the camera, it's going to give us where we're starting from. And then all we're going to do is go on this half, skip a little bit, come down this half, and each time we come down, we're just going out a little bit further, and I'm just leaving a little bit of space in between. So I'm just going to keep going then. I might skip, might come out here. I can start to change my angles because I know as I come down, all of those little needles on the pine tree or the spruce tree might just start to come out, and I can start to get closer together as I come down to the bottom. And you might be thinking, well, that's great, that's half a tree. Of course, because we want to show the light source. So on this side, I'm just going to do the same thing, but just go lighter. And by having that line in the middle, it gives me a good breaking point of where to go lighter and where to go darker. And I can just keep making these lines. You see how simple this is? This is great. It's so easy. Then we get down here to the trunk, just kind of color something in, fill in the middle where we have those lines, and pretty much you've got an evergreen tree. And then I can go back in and get darker in the middle, because just like the tree that we did over here, everything towards the center of the trunk is usually a little bit darker. And start coloring that in. It's not hard at all. And then we'll go underneath this bottom one and give it a little bit of a shadow. And then again, just like the other one, give it a little more of a trunk. So you pretty much got the sense of these trees, and you can join these in lightly if you want to kind of soften them in a little bit so it doesn't look completely scattered. But that should give you the basic idea of a deciduous tree and an evergreen tree. Real quick in pencil. This didn't take much time at all. So hopefully you can see that. That's not too hard. So you're thinking, well, that's great. What can I do with these? Well, you can make more of them. So you could have a whole forest, and that's the start of anybody doing a landscape. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about how to take these and maybe add some color. So stay tuned. Well, we finished our basic tree, and the operative word here is basic. But with a little bit of pizzazz, also known as adding some color and some other techniques, we could make this a little more interesting. So I took my practice by beginning 2 trees, and hopefully you can see this again. It's very light, and I know I'm getting a bit of a shadow here, but I lightly trace the trees on this paper. You'll see it better when it's flat. What we're going to do now is add some color, and I'll show you how to make this work with whatever you might have at home. If all you have are a few markers, it'll work. If you have some color pencils lying around, they'll work too, and I can show you some cool tricks with those. Here we have our deciduous tree barely lined out. So what I'm going to do is just start out with some colored pencils and do the same thing that I might have done with our regular pencil from our first lesson, where the tree bows out, where you see things that go in, like this little indent here, I'm going to press harder. And where it goes up towards the top, I'm going to press lighter. So just pressing lighter or harder with your pencil is going to give you the sense of shape and depth. And that's really key to making an interesting drawing. So if I pressed harder on one side of the trunk, I'm going to press lighter on the other. Just do some little jaggedy lines here for the roots, just to give it an idea. So again, we're going back to that press hard, go light, give it a little bit of edge and that sort of thing. So now that it's outlined, I can do a couple of things here. Again, I can start with some strokes just to give the sense of the trunk. But I don't have to do too much. I mean, and that could even work like that. But if I wanted to go darker, I could add a different brown, change it up a little bit. So if you have multiple browns, you're in luck. If you don't have anything like that, maybe just a little black pencil, colored pencil in and out will give a little more definition to that trunk and make it look not so flat. And we all know trunks have a lot of texture. So I'm just, and you notice I'm not really touching these branches up here because we're going to do something else with those. And I'm actually going to show you color pencil on one side and marker on the other so you can see. To do leaves or buds on a tree, I can do both. I'll take a green color pencil, just a basic color pencil, and all you have to do is make dashes, little marks here and there. These are going to be your leaves. And you know, the leaves can follow around. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to get the camera as close as I can so that you can see what's going on here. I'm just making, again, little dashes, very similar to the evergreen tree, but just putting some buds around on the tree. That works if you want an early spring tree. If you wanted a tree to look like it had more leaves, like a very full tree, you could continue that and build up layer and layer and layer. Or we can just start adding a lot of color by filling these in and getting some lighter areas and some darker areas. And I'm being messy on purpose because from a distance, leaves do not have a nice clean shape, especially on a deciduous tree. We're going to just start breaking all these in. And again, you know, the leaves might come in here. Some of them might even go across the trunk. That's the key. Don't forget there's a front of a tree. It doesn't just have leaves on the side and then the whole front is bare. So you can go across the tree, and I'm just making little squiggly marks. And as I go across the tree, it's starting to fill in with leaves. Now to make this a little more exciting, if you're lucky enough to have a second color green, I have a lighter green, I could go in here and start to add some different colors. The lighter green would certainly make it look more springtime because that's when this new growth comes in and you can start to get some new leaves. So you can see we can keep building along here and start to get leaves. Let's say, remember that cherry tree lesson, the very first one? I wanted this to have some flowering buds on it or something. Just change your colors. You could add pinks in here, and all of a sudden it has some flowers growing in the darker pink or a lighter pink or whatever color you want to do, yellows. That might work too. White is going to be more like leaving the paper show through, but you can see here, if I just make little short dots, and again, don't think, oh gosh, I can't draw that. Sure you can. I bet you've been dotting the letter I since first grade, and that's all these are. These are dots like that. It's just a whole bunch of them put together. So you can see I'm just getting these little dots following the branch, and I can start to get some pretty interesting little flower arrangement there, kind of making it look like it's blooming. So those are some ideas for this. Let's move over to the evergreen tree. For this one, I'll show you how to use a marker. These little Papermate marker pens or flares were some of my favorite things to have when I was a kid. I liked to doodle in all of my notebooks at school, much to the chagrin of my teachers, but I had fun with that with these pens. And they make wonderful lines. So let's say you just have a thin little marker pen. It's really easy. All you're doing is going up, down, up, down. I'm just making a whole bunch of letter W's so close together, I can't even read them. And if you're left-handed like me, you've probably been told most people can't read what you write anyway, so why not? That means you're probably all the better at drawing, so no worries there. Of course, right-handed people are good at it too, so really, it doesn't matter. But you can see how a thin little marker pen that you might have laying around the house can add a lot of life to this tree. And I'm just trying to go a little fast here so we can get this done. The more you build up a marker layer, the darker it gets. So if I wanted to simulate that darker area like I did on my pencil drawing, I'm just gonna go over this bottom part even more with the marker. And since I wanted a light source on this side, I'm just trying to go on the left side and have the light more on the right. I'm ignoring the trunk right now because I'm going to use a different marker for that. Okay. All right, I think that's pretty good for that. If you have a brown marker, great. I happened to find one. I didn't think I had one, but I had, and these are some just real basic Crayola markers. For the trunk, just don't color it in solid. Leave some things show. And you can even take it up in through here, maybe make a few dots so it doesn't look like the fake Christmas tree that you just got at like Home Depot or something like that, that it actually looks like it has some branches. Trees usually aren't so perfect as this, but we're just trying to get the idea. You could also take a colored pencil and color over your marker if you wanted to fill it in. This is called mixed media. It's where you're using more than one material to make the drawing. So you can see here, I'm just taking a colored pencil and lightly coloring this in so it's not so white and it looks like I have a little more going on. And then taking a black colored pencil and maybe just adding a little more depth to this trunk down here so I have some more interest. On top of the whole thing, if I wanted to show some lighter areas, I have a yellow highlighter marker. Now, most everyone has a yellow highlighter marker. You like to mark the things that you've read that's important. I can take a highlighter marker over my existing marker here, and you can see that this yellow marker is kind of almost running out, but it's still giving me some brightness. So it's adding some more interest to this tree. So it's not just sitting there being one little sad tree. And then back to last week's lesson, the pen, the ballpoint pen. I can use this over everything to just give that last little bit of shadow and depth just here and there wherever I want it. So the tree has a little more character. Going to go back down here and add another layer because I felt like this just looked too cut off. It looked too perfect. No tree is that perfect. I don't want it to look like a Charlie Brown tree either, but on the other hand, we just gonna wanna, as we would say, zhuzh it up a little bit so it looks a little more believable. And even taking that green now over the trunk will tie all that in. If I wanted to go back to my pencil tree here, I could take a marker over my colored pencil and it can make some really beautiful effects and make this pop. That looks a lot more interesting to me now than it did before. So I hope this gives you an idea of some simple ways to draw a tree, how to fill things in, and how to take what you've done with some different materials you might have around the house. I wanted to quickly go back to last week, this pen and ink drawing that I did, and show you that if you felt this was too stark and it was fun, but it just didn't have any color, you can go back and color over it. So let's just say these happen to be orange rocks. I can take an orange colored pencil and color in my pen and ink and just go over the whole thing, because where you had darker pen, it's going to be darker color. You don't even need another color. You could just use one. And this is so much fun and it's so easy and it goes so fast, but it adds quite a bit to your pen and ink drawing. So if you remember last week and you have your drawing, and this happened to look like this from the photo. It was the Southwest. It was desert. It was red clay and desert sand. So I'm just using one colored pencil and just pressing lighter or darker. It's just kind of coloring all this in, even going over the parts that were really dark with the pen. It'll make a difference, believe me. If you ever decide you want to switch color, you can do that, but I'm just using one color on the whole thing, almost doing a monochromatic, and I'm going really fast because I don't want to bore everybody, but I just want to show you how just taking one simple colored pencil can add a lot to the picture. So if you remember last week's, this gives it a little more interest, almost looks like a sepia tone. What we can do with one color pencil and a pen and ink is really marvelous. If you ever saw a black and white photo that was hand colored over it, same thing, only we're not using dyes and inks, we're just using one color pencil. If I wanted to use a different color pencil for the sky, I could do that too and just color in. I'll just do it briefly right here. So you can see where I colored it in, where I had pen and ink, it just gives the appearance of a darker blue, even though it's not. So it might be fun to try last week's lesson with some color pencils, if you have them around, or even a marker. You could use one marker. So there you have it. We have this week's lesson, which was basically taking a pencil, getting a rough idea of what a tree might be by making some lines that are different thicknesses, and then using some color to color it in. Colored pencil, marker, combination of both, it'll work. And then also, if you still have some time on your hands and you want to try it, try coloring in last week's pen and ink, one color, two color, or a whole bunch of colors, it doesn't matter. The key is to have fun with this and to enjoy learning how to draw. Next week, we're going to be putting together some of these objects that we've been doing singularly and making a whole scene, actually a whole landscape. So it should be a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you then. Until next week, be well.